Hello colleagues, this is Joost van Melle speaking to you from Groningen, the Netherlands. As a cardiologist for adult congenital heart disease patients, I will present to you a case from daily clinical practice. The male patient I would like to present is now 43 years old. He was born with a Tetrology of Fallot, for which he had a surgical correction at the age of 5. 13 years ago, a stent was placed percutaneously in the left pulmonary artery because of a stenosis. Due to his busy life as a businessman, he appeared infrequently at the outpatient clinic. The last years he denied complaints, but at the last control he told me that things are going well, except for some irregular heart beating. The irregular heart beating was not provoked by certain circumstances, and it was not followed by syncope or dizziness. However, the amount of palpitations was increasing in the last year. He denied other complaints and he was currently using no medication. On physical examination, the patient was overweighted, given his body mass index of 27. His blood pressure was 140/85 mm mercury, and the heart rhythm was regular with 78 beats per minute. On auscultation, we heard both a systolic ejection murmur and a short diastolic murmur. There were no signs of right-sided heart failure. Before I go on, please take some moments to read and answer the following questions. Do you think that the presence of palpitations in these patients is a common finding in Fallot patients? And would you do further investigations? And if so, which investigations would you opt in favor of? Most importantly, how the results will influence your policy. Please take a break if you need some time to make up your mind. With respect to the first question, I would like to show the results of a recent study among 700 adult Fallot patients. And here we see that palpitations are a rather common symptom. In this study, the presence of palpitations was associated with older age, surgical reoperations, female gender, and hypoplastic branched pulmonary arteries. The following investigations I would like to recommend for this patient: a 12-lead EKG, Holter monitoring, exercise testing, chest radiography, echocardiography, and magnetic resonance imaging. However, before going to the result of our investigations, I would like to raise your attention to the importance of the surgical report, because it contains, even after more than 35 years, crucial information to interpret today's investigations. As you know from the Fallot presentation in this ACHD course by Gary Webb, the reparative surgery for Fallot patients includes closing of the VSD and relieving the infundibular or right ventricular outflow tract stenosis. In this patient, the surgical report describes that the RVOT obstruction was relieved by a large transannular patch reaching the level of the left pulmonary artery. This is really important information because it may be expected that pulmonary regurgitation is severe at this stage. In the early days of congenital surgery, Fallot repair was conducted through a right ventriculotomy. Nowadays, the lesion is treated using a combination of transatrial and transpulmonary approach. Therefore, the location of the surgical incision is important to interpret the future rhythm abnormalities that may be due to re-entry circuits around surgical scar tissue. We go on with our patient. The EKG shows sinus rhythm, regular, and we see a right bundle branch block. In flow patients, a right bundle branch block is almost always present. The QRS duration is 150 milliseconds, and this is important information because the duration of the broadened QRS complex in flow patients has prognostic significance. This may be best illustrated by a plot of the QRS duration in 182 patients published in Circulation in 1995. Those patients with syncope or sudden cardiac death show broader QRS complexes than the non-syncope Fallot patients. The best cutoff is a QRS of 180 milliseconds, so our patient is not part of the high-risk group. Here we see a short part of the Holter registration illustrating a non-sustained ventricular tachycardia with a frequency of approximately 110 beats per minute. The patient had no complaints of dizziness or syncope at that moment. This non-sustained VT may be the cause of his palpitations, but we have to realize that also supraventricular tachycardia, like atrial flutters and atrial fibrillation, are also quite common within this population. The prevalence of these rhythm disturbances is a function of age, as shown in this figure from a multicenter study which was done on behalf of the Alliance for Adult Research in Congenital Cardiology. We can also see from the red line in this figure that also the prevalence of sustained VTs increases with age. All these rhythm disturbances are almost invariably associated with respectively tricuspid regurgitation and pulmonary regurgitation. Therefore, detailed hemodynamic assessment is of paramount importance in the patient with arrhythmia. On exercise testing, the patient shows moderate functional impairment with a VO2 max of only 63% of the predicted value, despite a respiratory quotient of more than 1. Blood pressure and heart frequency increase was within the normal range. The chest X-ray showed an enlarged cardiothoracic ratio, a left aortic arch, a stent in the left pulmonary artery, and no signs of congestion. On echocardiography, we see the characteristic features of the patient with repaired Tetrology of Fallot. we see an enlarged right ventricle on the parasternal axis and paradoxical movement of the interventricular septum. These are features that are in line with volume loading of the right ventricle. The reason for this volume loading became clear from the short axis at the level of the aortic valve and the right ventricular outflow tract. We see here a diastolic backflow from the branches of the pulmonary artery. The regurgitant jet is as broad as the diameter of the pulmonary annulus, and with Doppler imaging it is shown that the pressure half time is very short, in fact less than 100 milliseconds. It is this short duration of the diastolic backflow that makes it a challenging effort for a sonographer or auscultating cardiologist to recognize the significant pulmonary regurgitation. To quantify the right ventricular volumes, cardiac magnetic resonance nowadays have proven its value. The severe pulmonary regurgitation is confirmed by CMR, showing a pulmonary regurgitation fraction of 43%. An important measure in further decision making is the right ventricular end diastolic volume, and from this value the index value is calculated. For this patient, 168 milliliters per square meter body surface area. So in summary, we have found in our patient palpitations based on probably non-sustained VTs, which is related to the severe right ventricular dilatation, and this is caused by volume loading by the pulmonary regurgitation, which is severe. The patient had a right bundle branch block and a reduced exercise tolerance. Pulmonary regurgitation after Tetrology of Fallot is associated with arrhythmia, heart failure, and sudden cardiac death. The question is opportune to ask ourselves whether there is an indication for pulmonary valve replacement in this patient. Optimal timing of pulmonary valve replacement is important, and it is the focus of ongoing debate. Irreversible right ventricular damage may occur when the right ventricle is not unloaded by a sufficient pulmonary prosthetic valve. Both the European and the American guidelines are helpful in decision making. Patients with severe pulmonary regurgitation and symptoms or decreased exercise tolerance should be considered for pulmonary valve replacement. Therefore, we decided that our patient needed a valve replacement. The patient agreed with this policy. Finally, I would like to raise a few therapeutical issues. In our patient, complaints of palpitations resolved after beta blockade and pulmonary valve replacement. In the theoretical situation that the patient had showed sustained atrial flutter or atrial fibrillation, radio frequency ablation or surgical ablation during pulmonary valve replacement could have been considered. Finally, ACHD implantation for primary prevention remains controversial, and no ideal risk stratification scheme has so far been developed. The patient could not be classified as a high-risk patient for sudden cardiac death, and therefore we didn't implant an ICD. However, there are selected groups, like patients with poor LV function or very broad QRS duration, who may benefit from ICD implantation. So my take-home message is that every Fallot patient with palpitations deserves a careful hemodynamic evaluation with special attention for the possibility of severe pulmonary regurgitation. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Have a nice day and goodbye from Groningen.